Welcome back to another week of Political Breakfast. We are so glad that you are here again today, listening on WABE. We appreciate you coming back week after week and listening. And again, we're glad that you're here. I'm your host, Lisa Rayam, and here today, Republican strategist Brian Robinson and Saba Long, a real trooper who is always here when we need her. She is sitting in today for a Democratic strategist there in Johnson. So good to see and be able to chat with both of you. Happy Monday to you.
Hey, good to be with you too. Got some sleep after the late Falcons game. We promised Theron that we would congratulate him on being right, that the Falcons beat the Eagles on Monday Night Football last week. We promised we would mention
a week ago
that he went out on a limb, knowing we wouldn't be on air until after the game was over. And sure enough, the Falcons pulled out a big win. And then last night, I mean, look, to Theron's credit, the Falcons are looking better than I thought they were after week one.
Yeah.
To keep Mahomes to 22 points is pretty tough. That's a great offense. And our defense is looking good. We're going to have to put some more points on the board. But the only problem, I'll say, as a parent, not only as a professional, but as a parent, is I cannot stay up till after 11 watching football. This is ridiculous.
Yeah. I watched it. Atlanta put 7 points on the board, and then I was gone, so I didn't see the rest of the game. But yeah, it was a late one, wasn't it?
Brian, you sound like a boomer.
Hey, I'm a Gen Xer, and we're getting mighty close to what you think of
close to it.
as a boomer. We're getting on up there.
The game ended anyway. What was it, like
20
midnight when it was over?
It was close. It was like, what, 11 after 11:30, I think.
Yeah. No, thank you.
Yeah.
Can't do it.
Yeah, but we applaud the Falcons. Yeah, they are looking good, and Theron called it. He has a lot of faith in the Falcons this season, so we're pulling for them as well.
Yeah. Don't we play the Saints next?
Oh, I don't even know.
I think the Saints are next, so we'll see what happens on that one.
I can't. My mind is focused solely on Georgia, Alabama Saturday night. And this probably is a good transition into politics, Lisa and Saba, because President Trump is supposed to be going to the Georgia-Alabama game. I know he was looking at coming to a game at Sanford Stadium, and there are a lot of logistical problems with that, such as the fact that we don't have metal detectors there at our stadium, and they do at Alabama.
I'm going to say the fans are going to probably hate it, though, right? Because the security measures that are going to have to be in place.
I think if people have to stand in line for a long time and they can blame it on President Trump, I mean, Alabama's where you want to be making them mad because you're going to win Alabama no matter what. But by God, if you piss off 92,000 people in Athens, woo! I mean, 92,000 is way bigger than the margin of our election in Georgia. I wouldn't be doing that. So I think it's smart to go to Alabama where it doesn't matter, and Georgians can see you on TV and think, oh, cool, he's one of us. He likes football. Yeah.
Don't piss them off in Georgia. Well, yeah, we start our chat today talking about former President Donald Trump and his running mate JD Vance coming to Georgia this week. The pair traveling separately and skipping over Atlanta altogether. I guess covering as much territory as possible. We're getting down to the wire, aren't we? And it's important that they come. A lot of people have been wondering, where are they? Why hasn't Trump been to Georgia lately? And he is coming this week for sure.
Well, JD Vance is coming to Flowery Branch, so that counts as Metro Atlanta when you consider the media market, which is how we have to look at these things through a presidential campaign lens. And they're going to go to places where they can get a good, big, raucous, supportive Republican audience. And South Hall County, North Gwinnett County is a place where you can do that and be close enough to Atlanta media, so there's going to get a lot of local coverage here. And for the national media, they can fly into Atlanta and get up to Flowery Branch pretty easy. So it makes a lot of sense. So that is the Atlanta stop there. Of course, the Savannah, Macon, these are places that wouldn't normally get presidential candidate visits. But when the margin is 12,000, and it may be again, it looks again like we're just coming down to the wire. This is going to be a really close election. Then every little market counts. And you look at the Macon media market or the Columbus or Augusta, and you're talking about slices of the electorate that are less than 5% probably. Like 70% of Georgians live in the Atlanta media market. And so when you're going outside of that, you are hitting a very small percentage of Georgia voters with what we call earned media, meaning it's not something the campaign is paying for. So it just shows you that they recognize what narrow margins we should expect here, because they're speaking to small audiences as opposed to the biggest audiences.
I don't know, Saba, any thoughts on that? And I don't know, mainly why is it taking Trump so long to come back to Georgia, especially with it being such an important state at this point in the 2024 election?
Well, the campaigns have a lot of ground to cover in a very short amount of time. Right? Georgia is one of a number of battleground states, and JD Vance has been here, I think, twice.
Yeah,
I want to say since Trump was first here. To Brian's point, it's all hands on deck, right? And it's smart of them to divide and conquer. And I was listening. DeBose Porter was at an event that he spoke at an event that I was at earlier last week, and he talked about just how much in these smaller media markets across, like outside of Atlanta, there's Atlanta and then there's the rest of the state, about just how much local media is trying to help educate voters and make sure that they understand what's going on. It's going to be a game of inches.
Yeah, and the local media is very important and a great strategy for presidential campaigns because it's less cynical than national media. The national media is looking for some new angle every morning. It's going to be different, and often it's not what you want to be talking about. Whereas for local media, the fact that you are there is the news, less so than whatever your message of the day is. And so they allow you to sort of direct what you want the message to be and to reach in their audience. So local media is a very important element of what the campaigns are trying to accomplish here.
We're in 2024, talking about a 2024 presidential race, and can you believe we're still talking about things from 2020? Some text from
the election that never
Lieutenant
dies.
Governor. Oh my gosh, some text messages from Georgia Lieutenant Governor Burt Jones have come to light where he was very critical of some fellow Republicans regarding, the Trump loss here in Georgia. The texts were gathered by Special Prosecutor Pete Scandalakis in his investigation into whether Jones should be charged in that election interference case here in Fulton County. I don't know. What are your thoughts on that? The decision was that he should not be charged, but with this new information, I don't know. Any thoughts on whether or not that was a wrong call? Or not. I don't know.
I have been saying for 3 years that Burt Jones did not commit a crime and that the Fani Willis case was heavily flawed. And I think that this should have some trickle-down effect for some of the other people who have been charged who engaged in the same behavior or did the same things that Burt Jones did. So it should cast doubt in the minds of future jurors if they are deciding on, let's say, State Senator Sean Steele, just to name one, whether or not he committed a crime. We have this outside party, someone who is respected across the state, someone who has a great reputation, Pete Scandalakis, and he's come out and said what I've said for 3 years, that you can not like what he did. You can think that it wasn't seemly. You might think that it crossed some sort of ethical line. I don't think it crossed an ethical line, but some people obviously do. But I do think that a rational person could say they didn't cross a criminal line, that you could see them doing this, pursuing this route in good faith. And they have said all along, we did this as a legal mechanism because of a court case, and we had to have these votes cast in case we prevailed in that court case. And when they didn't prevail in the court case, they dropped it. And to me, that is where a crime was committed or not. And when they decided to drop it, then that backs up what they were saying, their reason for doing it, and they followed the rule of law. And that is why this Fani Willis case is overreach in many, many ways, beyond the fact that Fulton County taxpayers are picking up the tab for a case that is more suited to a federal court because these are cross-state line conversations. This was a federal election that was under consideration. There are many reasons why Fani Willis should have taken a pass, particularly coming out of COVID when we had a crime spike and there was a big backlog of cases in Fulton County. She took her eye off the ball. Burt Jones has been vindicated and had 3 years of this nonsense now put behind him. And I think that the case that Fani has built is beginning to crumble. All she will have to hang her hat on is the guilty convictions she got for much, much lower crimes, not felonies. They were misdemeanors. And those people were just simply doing it to save themselves millions of dollars in court cases that were going to drag on and drag on and drag on. They just took the misdemeanor and cut their losses. That doesn't mean they committed crimes.
I don't know, Saba, what do you think about that? Here you have Fani Willis, and who was at one time applauded for building this very meticulous case. In your eyes, is it slowly falling apart? And is this another sign that it's going down that path?
That's a tough one. I think part of the problem is there are so many different things for folks to focus on over the course of this election cycle. And this is one that to some extent might be falling by the wayside as far as something that the public is really concerned about. But I look at what happened in 2020, and I look at the rhetoric that I'm seeing as it relates to the 2024 election, what the state elections board is doing, and I worry about what does the day after the election look like in Georgia. And will we see some of the same type of actions that we saw in 2020? And if folks got at most a slap on the wrist, at best, it's okay, no worry this time around. What do they do in 2024? What do they do in November, in December, in January before the inauguration? That's what I'm concerned about.
You're shaking your head, Brian. Like, is that what you were saying, basically, in a nutshell?
Well, I'm concerned about what's going to be in the wake of the 2024 election, too. And I don't agree with everything that happened in the wake of the 2020 election, and longtime Political Breakfast listeners know I've been very clear on that. I think some of it went too far, and January 6th being the culmination of it going way too far. But at the same time, I believe that those people who broke windows in the Capitol and slammed police officers with objects and shields and flagpoles, they should go to prison. And I think people who cast alternate electoral votes in case a court case went their way shouldn't be going to prison. And to me, that's a clear dividing line. I mean, one thing that we talk a lot about here when it comes to respecting the outcome of the 2020 election is the rule of law. And I want to be consistent on supporting the rule of law. If we go through the process, we go through the legal cases, and the system says that this outcome is legitimate, we all need to move on. And at the same time, I want to support the rule of law by making sure that we don't have something that is a political prosecution or something that looks like a political prosecution. And I think there's a pretty strong argument to be made that this is a political prosecution.
In those text messages, Burt Jones had some very harsh words for fellow Republicans in the state, and it caused some internal divisions that, Jeff Duncan has talked about and others. I don't know, Brian, do you have your pulse on that? Where does the GOP here in Georgia stand with those divisions? Is the party mending itself, especially ahead of this pretty big election coming up in the next few weeks?
Burt Jones having to turn over text messages actually got off pretty good on this accord because I think all of us would have text messages that we wouldn't want to see put into national media. And what he wrote is very consistent with what he said publicly. The criticism of Jeff Duncan was fierce, but he criticizes Jeff Duncan fiercely in on-the-record interview. So that's nothing new. That's not shocking. And frankly, I don't think it hurts them with Republican voters at all to be taking shots at Jeff Duncan, who has endorsed Kamala Harris. And that makes him free game for any Republican office holder. The one thing that would certainly raise eyebrows in Georgia Republican circles is that he was complaining that Kemp wasn't moving forward with these demands for a special session to perhaps overturn the electoral votes and install Republican electors. And he said, that guy, he's not doing it, that guy, right? And he has said that we're all rowing in the same direction now. That's bygones. Governor Kemp hasn't said anything about it. I think that could have been a lot worse. I think what was said about Kemp could have been a lot worse, and the fact that it wasn't is probably good news for Burt Jones. Governor Kemp obviously is the most popular politician in the state, and the number 2 politician is nowhere close to number 1. Like you can't see him because of the curvature of the earth. He's so far ahead, And so I think not going after Kemp any harder was good news for Burt Jones. Not that he was thinking 4 years later this will be in the New York Times, but I don't think Kemp got his underwear in a wide over what was said. And look, I've never gotten the impression that there's a particularly strong relationship between the two of them anyway.
Well, Saba, your opinion then, the release of these text messages, a big deal, yes or no?
I think it just shows the clear fissure in the Georgia Republican Party. There's a distinction between the top leadership at the state level, so whether that's Governor Kemp, Raffensperger, and others, and then the party leadership itself, right? I mean, if you look at who Burt Jones was texting, he was texting party leadership about this. And Burt, to Brian's point, Burt and Kemp, I don't see them being, while they're politically aligned, they're not necessarily aligned as far as this election and the broader kind of future of the Republican Party. And I think that's what is really, of course, Trump is on the ballot in Georgia, but I think within the Republican Party, there's a question of what does the future of the party hold? And there's a different party in the Kemp world and a different party, I think, in the Jones world. And so we'll see what ends up happening there.
Saba, expound on that. What do those two parties look like? What do those two parties look like?
I would say, the Kemp world, to me, comes across as what would be seen as center right. Although policies have not necessarily been center right, Kemp has positioned and fashioned himself as a center right elected official. Burt Jones, on the other hand, has aligned himself with Trump rhetoric, Trump tactics across the board, right? I mean, you don't see Kemp using the type of language that Burt Jones uses. So I would imagine in the future, right? So fast forward, we all know that the lieutenant governor wants to run for governor, right? That's his intention. And so I imagine that will be closer to a Ron DeSantis type of governorship versus a Brian Kemp.
Yeah. I think it's tone and tenor is a big part of the divide here. When it comes to the MAGA and non-MAGA Republican primary electorate, there's not a big difference when it comes to policies. Most of those voters love President Trump. They're going to vote for him in November. And they also love Governor Kemp. They would vote for him whatever he ran for in the future, even though there's been this huge divide between the two of them over the last 4 years. And so it's a tone and tenor type of approach that is different. Burt Jones has aligned himself with whatever Trump world, whatever MAGA world has said, and their way of seeing the 2020 election. And Governor Kemp is someone who has denied that the election was stolen, that there was fraud that led to Joe Biden winning the Georgia election. And that tiny little issue, I say tiny, because it should be tiny, but ended up being massive. It's a massive issue that reverberates 4 years later, is what divides the two. And so you've got one group that might refer to itself as the MAGA Republicans, and then another group, which would also include Brad Raffensperger and Chris Carr, that might call itself the rule of law Republicans. And they're not divided over policy. They're divided over differences on very narrow issues, but narrow issues that have huge consequences.
Can I just add one thing to that? I think we saw this divide on display a couple of weeks ago, Lisa, at the event that you moderated. And Brian and I were there, and it was with two governors, Governor Deal and then Governor Barnes, as well as former Senator Saxby Chambliss and Shirley Franklin. And you saw these four individuals come together to really coalesce around making sure that the election in Georgia is fair and accurate. And at the same time, there was, I will use the word disturbance, from
a minor one,
from GOP party leadership, right? Where there's this really angry. Was a thing that struck me was not only are they they have a point of view, but there's a level of vitriol
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
associated with it. Even though on that panel are two folks, particularly Saxby Chambliss, who has been a staunch Republican.
Mm-hmm.
And so if you're seeing that level of vitriol towards a former Republican governor and a former Republican senator, it makes me wonder what in the world are state or county election boards and county election leaders across the state facing from folks who have that particular point of view.
Yeah, and I remember asking you at the time, you go to a lot of these events, and I said, does this happen at a lot of the events? And you said, yeah, that one person in particular, shows up quite a bit and does that same thing. So it kind of interrupts, the process and more importantly, the dialogue.
That's right.
Well, the person who got interrupted at that event was a state Republican Party executive committee member, and very much holds the MAGA worldview that I was just discussing, that the election was stolen. And if you say otherwise, you're part of the problem and you're part of the great denial of what really happened. And, that's not my viewpoint, obviously. I think it's all crazy talk. But I think it's important for people in that room to hear that voice, because that voice is not a voice in the wilderness. It represents something much broader. Many people in Georgia share that point of view. And that doesn't mean that we have to say, oh, that's legitimate. But we do have to look and say, how do we move forward knowing that so many people think what this guy thinks? So in that way, I think hearing those voices and the anger, that guy used profanity in his, screamed, all of this stuff in front of Saxby Chambliss and Roy Barnes and Shirley Franklin and Nathan Deal, who are probably all in their 80s now or late 70s, genteel Southern gentlemen and gentle ladies, and this guy is just going off on the deep end. But I think it's important because, look, as a Republican consultant, what you are hearing there is something that I hear a lot. And I know y'all don't so much, but I want other people to see what I see.
Yeah, I mean, we hear it to some extent when our reporters are out talking to folks, for sure. But I think there's a disconnect between, there's two very distinct realities. And the question is, how do we bridge these realities? Or is that even possible? And you think about, okay, we're still litigating in the court of public opinion, the 2020 election. Again, what happens in 2024? All signs point to this being a close election in Georgia, right? So it's doubtful that it will be a landslide in Georgia. The state elections board has just required a hand count, and that's going to go before litigation. What are the steps in place, and what are the responsibilities of state elected leaders and others to help people understand the electoral process and start to bridge this trust gap that we have? Because it's a profound gap.
The only person that I know on our side who can do that is Brian Kemp. No one else has his standing, his credibility, his strong support that he has. And, particularly if he's not running for anything in 2026, and I don't think that he is, he could be that person. Now, granted, he's also got to calculate other things. He's now got a peace pact, essentially, with President Trump. And we've seen, the depth of it in the sense that you don't see Kemp at the Savannah rally with Trump. You see him going off and doing – you're not seeing the visual of them together. But you hear them saying the same things and rowing in the same direction. So it kind of gives you a level set of where they are. And I don't think Governor Kemp wants to upset the apple cart right now when it comes to that. But he's the person who, at the end of the day, and he knows this, he is the leader of the state. And you got to give him credit. The buck stops here should be on his desk. That's how he feels. The buck stops with me when it comes to Georgia. I think Governor Kemp understands that if there's a problem here, it is his problem, and he's once again at the tip of the spear in what will be a national conversation and perhaps a national controversy. But we as a state have been through it once. I think we know what to expect, and I think eyes will turn to Governor Kemp when and if we have that controversy here again.
I was going to say the day after the election in November, do you think we're going to have a result here in Georgia?
I don't.
Saba's thinking, shaking her head no. Yeah.
Well, not if we got a hand count, 5.5 million.
Yeah, hand count.
I mean, it's just,
I mean, how antiquated, but
It's
yeah.
an unfunded mandate is the other problem with that.
Absolutely. And look, counties are, by the way, they've burned through the 2 tranches of federal dollars they got from COVID, where they got this windfall of money. That's now drying up. Counties are about to face some tough decisions, particularly our small rural counties where the tax base is very small. So not only do you have a financial resource issue in a county where resources are scarce and you're trying to make sure you have enough sheriff's deputies and school teachers in the classrooms, to go out there and try to hire and train enough election workers in an environment where no one wants to be an election worker, right?
That's right.
You know, I was speaking with the CEO of WABE a couple of weeks ago when we were in studio doing a BBC hit there in WABE, and she's been out recruiting people to serve as election workers and encouraging her Rotary Club to get involved. That's hugely important. But the fact that someone like her is thinking about recruiting election workers shows you where we are on this, right? Like, I mean, it's a job.
Yeah, it used to be a great job for retirees. They used to love doing
absolutely.
it. Yeah, they'd sign up in a minute.
Yeah, you get about 12 hours of work and paid by the hour.
Yeah.
Now it's too risky.
Too risky.
Now somebody's going to come scream at you. They're going to come scream at you.
Right. Saba Long, Executive Director of the Atlanta Civic Circle, Brian Robinson, our Republican strategist. Thank you both for your insight, as always, on a myriad of topics this week
Always
on
fun.
Political Breakfast. We'll talk to you both soon.
Good to be with y'all. Go Dogs.
Thank you.